of this inner click. And in that moment, what I could see immediately was that the animating life force in me was beginning to drain away. I didn't yet know why. That would come in a little while. But it was very clear that my body had just begun to die. And there was a couple of recognitions, realizations, revelations that followed immediately upon that awareness of that inner click. The first was, to my sort of quiet astonishment, was that I immediately recognized that I wasn't my body, which was something that I couldn't have conceived of until that moment. What I mean by that is that what I recognized was that the body was dying, but that there was a consciousness, being, some aspect of my beingness that was observing the fact that my body was dying, and that observing consciousness was not dying. So it was this experience of seeing that I wasn't my body, that those seemed to be two different things, and it rendered the body actually oddly unimportant, which was another aspect of it. And so immediately upon recognizing that, there was this concurrent recognition that it wasn't that big of a deal even, which was very difficult to, otherwise conceptualize under normal circumstances. Another thing that was immediately clear was that even though my body was beginning to die, it was taking place at a relatively slow rate. I could literally feel that, as I said, life force, animating life force, just beginning to drain away. And it was sort of like imagining or watching the mercury in a thermometer just recede, and it was going rather slowly. I couldn't say exactly, but it kind of seemed like, there's probably at least a day or two that this could go on. So that sort of added to this feeling of, surprisingly, this feeling of not being terribly worried about it. Like there was plenty of time to consider this and to almost sort of revel in it. The other thing that was astonishing in that moment was that in recognizing that I wasn't my body, that also conferred a recognition that I wasn't the pain that was in that body. So this had really been, to that point, again, there had been 4 days in the hospital, there had been 3 or 4 days in my father's care, the farmhouse there, and that had been a level of just dealing with really mind-bending, like blackout level pain. And it was a level of pain that's actually quite typical for this kind of situation. So there wasn't anything surprising about it to anyone. It's just that I'd never experienced anything like that before. But in this moment, in recognizing that I wasn't the body, I also recognized that pain wasn't me. And it wasn't as though that in that moment the pain itself disappeared. It's just that it was all of a sudden rendered kind of irrelevant. There was an immediate freedom from it in a way that was spectacularly freeing. It rendered it without real effect. Like the observing witness consciousness that was able to look upon the situation and recognize that the body wasn't me and that pain wasn't mine. That observing consciousness wasn't in pain at all. And being able to experience that, then again, it's kind of hard to put into words, of course, but because again, the pain itself didn't actually disappear. It was the first time I ever, and it was not the last, but it was the first time I ever got to experience the difference between pain and suffering. The pain was still there, but I wasn't not suffering it in any way at all. And of course, that was kind of a freedom from what had otherwise been really absolute hell up to this point. And in that moment of freedom, there sort of floods in this third recognition. So if the first was that I wasn't my body, and the second was that this process was going rather slowly and that I had some time, the third was even harder to put into words than the other two, which was there was, as every iota of life force seemed to be falling away, there was an equal and growing experience of merging into the infinite. The overwhelming beauty of that rendered me into a state of absolute awe. One of the aspects of that that's more difficult to put into words than most is that there was no sense of loss in that. I could recognize that witness consciousness that was observing the body and didn't need to be concerned with the pain at all was still sort of there was a sort of sense of individuatedness in that. Like, okay, I wasn't my body, but I was some sort of non-corporeal consciousness, being that was still, sort of had a separate individuated sense to it. Like this non-corporeal but individuated sense could look at that body and see that it wasn't me. But in the merging into the infinite, it was clear that even that sense of individuatedness was beginning to dissipate. It was merging into the infinite. It was losing its individuality. It could easily be perceived by someone that's really a sense of what death is, when you lose your sense of self. If you are merging into the infinite, you are merging into what is absolutely whole, absolutely. It's like merging into this ineffable allness. And if something is completely whole and is all, and then there is nothing missing from it. Nothing missing from it. The word oneness is often thrown around in trying to describe these kinds of things. In any case, what I can say is that if something is completely whole, it can't possibly be missing anything. And that's why it's possible to experience the merging into the infinite and the loss of that sense of self as not having been a loss at all. Because how could there be any sense of loss in something that is utterly and completely whole? There can't possibly really be any sense of fear. Nothing's missing. There can't possibly be a sense that there is something broken or wrong. And so one of the funny outcomes of all of that is that I couldn't look upon my own dying body as being a problem. There was nothing wrong here. In fact, merging into that wholeness is something that was far and away the most beatific, most extraordinary, most staggeringly beautiful thing that I'd ever encountered. And so to think of it in terms of loss or being wrong or bad or a problem was absolutely impossible. And so I didn't. The only possible sort of default setting then was to experience it as, I'm borrowing this line from a popular source, but it was the peace that passes all understanding. But there was that sense of understanding that and reveling in that peace. And the only sort of natural default response to it was a quiet joy and a sense of awe. So that's it. I've discovered my body is dying. It's racked with mind-bending pain. And my response to it in the end is awestruck peace that passes understanding in a way that can only be expressed in quiet, absolute joy. And I basically sat and stared out the window in awe for some time. It's the middle of the day. My father has been sort of, coming in and out of the house periodically, doing farm chores and house chores and things and checking up on me periodically. And eventually he reappears and, has a look, how am I doing? I say nothing. I can't imagine how to explain any of this to him. I can barely talk at the moment as well. That's certainly a factor. Not only would I have found it extremely difficult to put into words at all, there was no impulse to put it into words. A phrase I've become very, very fond of was, it just seemed that silence was the best vessel for holding this.